The evidence is irrefutable, Mara.
They thought they broke me, but I finally understand the truth. I won't be silent anymore.
She was the one who always followed the rules, but today everything fell apart. It began on a quiet morning, the kind of morning she'd always taken comfort in. Soft light leaking through half-drawn curtains, the kettle humming low on the kitchen counter, and the familiar smell of the old wooden floors warming in the early sun. Mara Lewis stood barefoot in her small apartment, hair still damp from her shower, tracing a fingertip across the condensation on the window as she absent-mindedly waited for the kettle to whistle. It was supposed to be a normal day. Nothing more, nothing less. She had her routine, leave at 7:30, catch the 7:48 train, walk the long way to the office so she could pass the bakery on 3rd Street and smell the fresh bread rising through the vents. Then she'd sit at her desk by 8:59, 1 minute early, as always, and start the files that someone else would inevitably take credit for. As she sipped her tea and glanced over the papers spread across her small dining table, she tried to steady the heaviness in her chest. She told herself it was only another workday, only another quiet battle to stay invisible yet competent, to follow the rules because they were the only things that ever made sense to her. Her whole life had been built on that idea: do everything right and nothing will go wrong. But she didn't know, couldn't have known, that by sundown she would lose everything she thought she understood. When she stepped outside, the air carried that early winter bite, the kind that made her instinctively tug her scarf a little tighter. The street was busy but calm. Cyclists zipped past, a truck rattled by, and somewhere on the next block, a dog barked impatiently. She kept her eyes low, her breath steady. Her mind drifted back to the strange email she'd received the night before. A message from an unknown sender, with no subject line, containing only 8 words. You think they don't know, but they do. She had stared at it for almost half an hour, her heart thudding dully as she tried to reason her way through the possibilities. Scam? Mistake? Some misplaced attempt at intimidation? She deleted it finally, convincing herself it meant nothing. But now, as she walked toward the station, she could still feel the sentence lingering, like a cold fingerprint pressed against her spine. The train was late, a rarity. And when it finally arrived, the doors screeched open with a metallic groan that set everyone on edge. Mara stepped inside and gripped the overhead rail, the floor vibrating beneath her feet as the train lurched forward. She watched the blur of buildings outside the window and tried to let her mind settle, but her thoughts kept drifting, circling something she couldn't yet name. Anxiety hummed under her skin like a trapped current. At the second stop, 2 uniformed transit officers boarded the train. No one paid much attention at first. Random checks happened often enough. The officers began walking down the aisle, asking quietly for tickets, IDs, proof of payment. Mara reached for her wallet out of habit. But when she looked up, one of the officers, tall, heavy-set, with stern eyes that didn't match his polite tone, was staring directly at her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice too calm. "May I see your ID, please?" She nodded and handed it over, offering a tight smile meant to be reassuring, though she couldn't tell if she was trying to reassure him or herself. He studied the card longer than necessary. His partner leaned in, whispered something, and suddenly both officers straightened with a strange, almost electric shift in posture. "Mara Lewis?" the first officer asked, though her name was printed clearly on the card. "Yes," she replied, her voice catching slightly. "Ma'am, we need you to step off the train with us." A murmur rippled across the passengers. Someone scooted their backpack closer. Another person raised an eyebrow, subtly stepping out of the way. Mara felt heat flood her face. I don't understand," she said. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" "We'll explain once we're off the train," the officer said, though he didn't sound like he planned to explain anything at all. Her mouth went dry. Her hands trembled as she gathered her bag. The entire car seemed to be watching her now, eyes following her every movement. She tried to keep her breathing steady as she stepped onto the cold platform. The officers circled slightly behind her, forming a loose but unmistakable barricade. "We've received a report," the second officer said. "Your name was flagged in connection with embezzlement and unauthorized access to confidential systems at your workplace." Mara blinked hard, certain she'd misheard. "What? No, that's not possible. I would never. I don't even have access to anything like that." The officer lifted a printed document. Her name was at the top, her employee ID number, a timestamp from the previous evening, a record of someone using her credentials to extract sensitive financial data. She felt dizzy, her knees nearly buckled. "This isn't real," she whispered. "This can't be real." The officers exchanged a knowing glance, the kind that suggested they'd heard that line before. One of them radioed something she couldn't make out. The next moment, she felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am," the officer said quietly, "please remain calm." She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She wanted to explain how she had spent the previous night alone in her apartment, making tea, reading through paperwork, ignoring a cryptic email because she had convinced herself the world was predictable and safe. But instead she found herself being escorted through the station, past strangers who paused to stare. She caught a reflection of herself in a passing glass barrier, wide-eyed, flushed, trembling, and for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize the person looking back. At the small transit security office, she sat in a metal chair while the officers made calls, typed reports, and made no effort to hide their suspicion. The room felt too bright, too cold. Every second stretched painfully long. Finally, one officer returned. "Your workplace confirms the breach happened under your login," he said. "They're requesting you be held for questioning." "But I didn't do anything," she said, louder than she meant to. "Someone set me up. Someone used my account." "Do you know who might want to do that?" She hesitated. The email, the warning, that strange sinking feeling she'd ignored for months. But she didn't know who it could be. Not yet. Not clearly enough to say aloud. "No," she whispered. The humiliation only deepened when her phone was taken, her bag searched, her personal notebooks leafed through as though she were a criminal hiding evidence. She kept thinking, "This isn't my life. This isn't me. Things like this don't happen to people who follow the rules." But they were happening, and worse, she realized someone had planned for them to. Hours passed. A detective arrived, a man with patient eyes, but an expression that said he had already formed an opinion. He asked questions that felt like traps: where she'd been, who she'd spoken to, what she had accessed at work, whether she had financial problems she wasn't disclosing. She answered in halting, terrified fragments. The more she tried to explain her innocence, the more guilty she sounded, even to her own ears. Then came the moment everything shifted. The detective placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a black USB drive. "This," he said, "was found in your desk drawer during a preliminary workplace search." Mara stared at it, shaking her head violently. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before. I don't even use... Who put that there?" The detective watched her carefully, studying every tremor in her voice, every flicker of fear in her eyes. He leaned forward slowly. "Miss Lewis, is there anything you want to tell us?" She broke then, not from guilt, but from the crushing weight of being unheard, unseen, disbelieved. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered through sobs. "Someone is doing this to me. Please, please believe me." But no one did. Not yet. By late afternoon, everything she knew, her routine, her reputation, her sense of safety, had collapsed. She was suspended from work pending investigation. She was released from custody but told not to leave the city. She was advised to cooperate fully, as though she had spent her life refusing to cooperate with anything at all. When she finally stepped back onto the street, the sky had darkened. Rain slicked the pavement. Cars hissed past, splashing water onto her shoes. She walked without direction, her thoughts churning, dread clawing up her spine. She didn't know the truth, didn't know what was coming, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Someone wanted to destroy her, and somewhere inside her, a long-buried instinct she had spent years suppressing began to wake up. By the time she reached her apartment, night had fallen. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. When she unlocked her door and stepped inside, the quiet hit her like a blow. Except it wasn't quiet. Her laptop screen glowed faintly on the table. She had left it off that morning. Her breath hitched, her heart thumped painfully. She stepped closer. A document was open, one she didn't recognize. A message filled the screen, typed in stark black letters. "You were never supposed to find out, but now that you're involved, you need to remember what you did." Her hands shook so violently, she nearly dropped her bag. She read the sentence again and again, trying to make sense of the words. Remember what she did? But she hadn't done anything, had she? Her vision blurred as old memories, ones she kept locked away, buried deep, began to claw their way to the surface. A different workplace, a different life, a mistake she had run from years ago, a night she had tried desperately to forget. Someone knew, someone had been waiting for the right moment. The truth, the real truth, was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than the accusation she faced now. And as she stood alone in her dim apartment, staring at the words on her screen, she realized with dawning horror that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was revenge, and the past she had spent years trying to escape had finally found her. She sank to the floor, trembling as the weight of it all settled around her. Not just the accusation, not just the setup, but the memory she had forced herself to erase. The one that now flooded back with agonizing clarity. She saw the face of the person she had once trusted, the contract she had signed without reading, the data breach she had unknowingly enabled, the person who had taken the fall in her place. She had told herself it wasn't her fault, but someone else had paid the price. And now they wanted her to pay it back. As the rain continued tapping softly against the window, she whispered into the silent room, her voice cracking with the truth she had hidden for so long. "I deserve this, don't I?" But even as the words slipped out, another voice inside her rose, quiet, shaky, but unmistakably defiant. "No, not like this, not by their hands." The aftermath stretched endlessly. Sleepless nights, investigations, whispers from neighbors, messages she was afraid to open, shadows that seemed to move when she wasn't looking. But with every passing hour, every new piece of information she forced herself to confront, the truth became sharper, clearer. She wasn't being punished for what she had done. She was being hunted by the one person who knew her darkest secret. And she realized that the only way to survive, emotionally, legally, physically, was to expose the truth herself, to face what happened years ago, to confront the person who had destroyed her life once and was now trying to destroy it again. In the end, the story wouldn't be about her innocence. It would be about her courage, the courage to face her past, the courage to fight back, the courage to stop running. And as she stood before the mirror days later, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but determined, she whispered the words she had never believed she'd say. "This ends with me." Her voice didn't shake anymore. She finally understood that the truth can ruin you, or it can free you, and she was ready at last to decide which one it would be. Her reflection stared back at her, haunted yet resolute, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. She stood there in the thin hallway light, listening to the quiet hum of her apartment as though it were a stranger she had invited in. Everything felt foreign now. The creak of the floorboards, the distant sound of traffic below, even the rhythm of her own breathing. It was as if the world had shifted in its orbit and she had been left standing in a life tilted out of place. She wiped her eyes, swallowed the tremor in her throat, and forced herself to sit at her kitchen table. The same table where she had once sorted spreadsheets and filled out tax forms and quietly lived a life small enough to feel safe. She pulled her laptop closer, willing her hands to stop shaking. She needed answers, not panic, not fear, not another night spent crumbling beneath the weight of what she didn't understand. She clicked through her files, searching for anomalies, for evidence, for anything that might anchor her spinning thoughts. Her heart thudded as she navigated folder after folder. Then her cursor froze over a directory she'd never seen before, one hidden beneath layers of meaningless names. It was labeled Recipient. Her breath hitched. She clicked. Inside was a single encrypted file. A small timestamp blinked at her, created 11:32 p.m. the night before. She hadn't been awake at 11:32. She had been asleep, curled beneath her blanket, convinced her life was still intact. Whoever had done this had been in her system long before she realized. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard until she typed the password she least wanted to try. An old word, an old scar, the name she had spent years pretending didn't exist. The file opened instantly. Her blood turned cold. Inside was a video. She double-clicked it, and the screen flickered before resolving into a grainy recording of a dim office years ago. Her old office. The room she had sworn she would never see again. The camera angle made it clear. The footage had been taken secretly, from the corner of the ceiling, unnoticed by everyone in the room. She watched herself walk into frame, years younger, hair shorter, shoulders tense with the quiet obedience that had ruled her life then. She watched as her old supervisor, Derek Marlowe, handed her a thick folder. She remembered him. Everyone remembered him. The charismatic one, the smooth talker, the man who always seemed to know how to get exactly what he wanted. She remembered how small she had felt around him. "How much do you trust me, Mara?" the younger version of him said on screen, the same words she had pretended to forget. Back then, she had smiled nervously. Of course. Why? He leaned in close, whispering something the camera couldn't pick up, but Mara remembered it perfectly. "Just sign the authorization. You're covered. I'll handle the rest." She had believed him. She had wanted desperately to be seen as helpful, reliable, trustworthy. She had signed the papers without reading them, papers that gave him full access to data he wasn't supposed to touch. And when everything went wrong, when a massive breach was discovered, when the company panicked and demanded consequences, Derek had vanished into thin air, leaving her name on every document, every access log, every suspicious request. She remembered the way the boardroom looked when they called her in, cold, sterile, full of eyes that could not see her humanity. She remembered the way she sat alone, trembling, trying to explain that she didn't know she had been involved in anything illegal. She remembered the humiliation of being escorted out by security. She remembered the sinking exhaustion of spending months trying and failing to rebuild her life afterward. But the one thing she didn't remember until now was the final moment in the footage, the moment Derek returned to the camera's view after she left the room. He looked directly into the lens. He smirked, and he whispered, "She won't know what hit her." The video ended abruptly. Mara felt the world tilt beneath her. She pressed a hand to her chest as panic clawed at her ribs. Derek wasn't just responsible. He had planned it, calculated it. He had used her as a shield and then disappeared, leaving her to absorb the fallout. And now, all these years later, someone had resurrected that old wound. Someone had dragged her back into the nightmare she had barely survived. She closed her eyes and inhaled shakily. It's him, she thought. It has to be him. But how? Why now? And why threaten her again? Her phone buzzed violently on the table, making her jump. The screen lit up with an unknown number. She hesitated, dread prickling down her arms, but she answered. "Mara!" The voice was low, hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Her grip tightened. "Who is this?" A long pause, then, "You should have stayed quiet." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Derek?" Another pause, colder this time. "You were supposed to forget, but you didn't. You've always been terrible at pretending." Her spine stiffened, fear mixing with fury so sharp it tasted metallic. "What do you want?" "You'll find out soon," he said simply. "Think of today as a reminder, a hint of what happens when you refuse to play along." "You ruined my life," she said, voice quivering with years of swallowed rage. "No," he replied softly. "I saved mine. Unfortunately, you were standing where the blame needed to land." Her breath shattered into uneven pieces. "But now," he continued, "you're becoming a problem again, asking questions, opening files, remembering things I worked very hard to bury." Her skin prickled with cold sweat. "Mara," he said, lowering his voice to an icy whisper, "stop digging. You won't like what you find." The line went dead. For a full minute, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even swallow. Her hands trembled so violently, she almost dropped the phone. But then, slowly, painfully, deliberately, a different feeling surfaced. Resolve. So this was it. The truth she had run from. The man who had destroyed her reputation years ago. The same man who had resurfaced to finish what he started. Only this time, she wasn't the naive, frightened junior employee who signed whatever was placed in front of her. She stood, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. The fear was still there, thick and choking, but for the first time, it wasn't in control. She was. She grabbed her coat, slipped her trembling arms through the sleeves, and stepped out into the night. She didn't know exactly where she was going, not yet, but she knew the first step. Find someone who remembered the truth. Someone who had been there the night everything collapsed. Someone who might be brave enough, desperate enough, or guilty enough to finally talk. If Derek wanted her to stop digging, then digging was exactly what she would do. Every lie had an origin, every betrayal had a witness, and every villain, no matter how careful, left a trail. As she walked into the dark streets, the cold wind slicing across her skin, she whispered to herself, not a prayer, not a plea, but a promise. "I'm not running anymore." The night swallowed her words whole, but for the first time in a long, painful journey, She finally felt like she was walking towards something instead of away.